Lashad Merritt left his home on Monday night in Philadelphia to go get a snack. He never came home from the corner store, though. Lashad was the youngest of five siblings. He loved his family, his girlfriend, and his job. And after this 4th of July, his mother's pain is far too familiar.
Some maniac walking around just shooting. For what? We probably would never know why, but you took my son. You took my baby. You took him.
Lashad was one of 7 people who were shot by a gunman stalking the Southwest Philadelphia neighborhood. 5 of those lives are now over. Whether it was a block party in Baltimore or Shreveport, or a nightclub in Wichita, or a fireworks show in Fort Worth, this was a 4th that left families across the country devastated. Nicole Hockley lost her son Dylan in the Sandy Hook shooting. She is now the co-founder and CEO of Sandy Hook Promise. And Nicole, thank you for joining me tonight on something that is obviously all too personal with you. When you see the spate of shootings like what we've seen in the last several days, do you see them as resonating with the American public in the same way that a school shooting does, or the Walmart shooting that we saw where the killer there is now on trial?
I think unfortunately, gun violence has become such a perceived normal part of American life that far too many people just take all these shootings into their stride. And even a lot of school shootings don't make the headlines anymore, never mind the daily shootings. And I mean, this weekend alone, we had, 17 different mass shootings across the country. And we're hearing about some of them, but not all of them. And that's 17 more communities devastated. People need to realize that this is not normal. It's not normal at any day in America. And we need to be doing more about this and stopping it from happening.
Yeah, these are people's lives. I mean, you just heard from Lashad's mother there. And when I was looking at the numbers of this, you mentioned over the last few days, the July 4th weekend, according to the Gun Violence Archive, a decade ago, the U.S. had 118 mass shootings by the end of the 4th of July weekend. We are now at 354, which is a 200% increase. I mean, what do you think is driving that?
I think there's a lot of different factors driving it. I think even in the last decade, we've seen a significant increase in the number of guns in the American market, gun ownership in general. I think there's also a lot of fear that's being stoked and anger, and people not being able to resolve their conflicts or resolve their anger in more sensible, civil ways. It's just become far too easy to just reach for the gun and take anything out on those that you feel are doing something against you or your values or beliefs. And we're now in a war with our own country, and we're not looking at it that way. We've got this health epidemic that we're not doing anything about, and we're just allowing it to keep happening. There are people trying to make things happen, don't get me wrong, but we need more voices. We need gun owners to really add their voice to this movement and say, we don't want these happening in our neighborhoods and communities either. Our children deserve to be safe. Our families deserve to be safe. We need sensible legislation to help curb this before it just continues to get even worse and more out of hand than it already is.
You mentioned sensible legislation. These are shootings that happen across different states with very different gun laws, the shooters using different types of weapons. Mm-hmm. What would something like that look like? I know groups like yours have had success in pushing for new laws, but when you see the spate of this and the difference here, what does that look like?
Well, with a lot of mass shootings, we know that shooters give off signs before they commit acts of violence. And starting to look at some of the news reports that are coming out now, for example, the shooter in Philadelphia, there were warning signs. So people need to learn how to recognize those signs and then do something with it. Something like an extreme risk protection order or temporary transfer. That is a very sensible legislation that doesn't strip anyone of their constitutional rights, but says if someone is showing overt warning signs or is going into crisis and could be at risk of hurting themselves or someone else, there is a court process for temporarily removing their access to firearms until they are deemed fit to have them back. That has evidence to show that it works in stopping tragedies, and in particular suicide. Safe storage laws, expanded background checks. These are all sensible constitutional laws that would still help curb violence. But I also think like ghost guns. I know in school shootings, we're seeing more kids accessing ghost guns, where there is no regulation on them. There's no serial numbers to say where they are. You can just go to literally ghostguns.com and download blueprints and start building your own. And that's what people are starting to do. And there needs to be stricter regulation around that as well, because that's incredibly scary to everyday citizens as well as law enforcement.
Nicole Hockley, thank you for joining us tonight.